The alarm hadn't even gone off yet, but Mark was already sitting upright, drenched in sweat, clutching his chest like something was trying to rip its way out. The motel room was silent, save for the hum of the old air conditioner battling the Georgia humidity. He reached for his phone, 5:42 a.m., still dark out, still alone. He hadn't meant to fall asleep in this place, cheap, anonymous, and far enough from Atlanta that no one would recognize him. But last night, when the call came from his brother and the words, "Dad collapsed at the store," hit his ears, Mark just got in the car and drove. 21 hours later, this was where he ended up. Now the silence was unbearable. He stood, legs stiff from the drive, and paced toward the window. The blinds trembled with the breeze. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for his dented Toyota and a white pickup with a cracked windshield. He needed to move. He had to move. But something in him resisted, the same force that always did. He splashed cold water on his face and stared into the stained mirror. The face looking back was hollow-eyed, gaunt, a stranger. "You don't get to run this time," he muttered to himself, voice barely above a whisper. But even saying it didn't make it real. His father had built something, a life, a business, a name that people in Valdosta still respected, Sheldrake's Feed and Hardware. Mark had spent his whole youth swearing he'd never take it over, never get trapped. Now the man he'd spent years avoiding was lying in a hospital bed, maybe already dead, and Mark had no plan. Just a week's worth of clothes, half a tank of gas, and a phone full of unread texts. The motel room was suffocating. He threw on his hoodie, shoved his wallet in his back pocket, and stepped into the early morning haze. The air was thick with pine and dew, and the sky wore a muted pink that reminded him of childhood bike rides before sunrise. He hated that memory, hated how it still made something in him ache. The Waffle House across the road buzzed to life, its neon sign flickering. A woman in scrubs leaned against her car, smoking and scrolling through her phone. Mark watched her for a second, then crossed the road without really deciding to. He needed caffeine or a place to sit. Or maybe he just needed to pretend he was doing something, because standing still felt like drowning. As he pushed open the glass door, the warm scent of burnt coffee and frying bacon hit him like a wave of nostalgia and guilt. A waitress looked up. "Seat yourself, hun," she said. He chose the booth furthest from the windows facing the door. He didn't know why he was here, but he knew something had to change, and for once, he couldn't keep running from it. The coffee arrived before he even asked. The waitress, maybe mid-40s, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Linda, placed the mug in front of him without a word. She must have seen that look before, people who weren't just tired but emptied out. Mark stared into the mug, watching the thin swirl of steam rise. He wrapped his hands around it like it might steady him. He didn't drink coffee often. It reminded him of long mornings with his dad, sitting silent at the kitchen table, the smell of Maxwell House filling the house while his mother hummed gospel from the radio. But today wasn't about comfort. It was about not going numb. His phone buzzed. "Jason, one new MSG. They're taking him into surgery. Call me, man. Please." He didn't respond. Couldn't. The phone shook in his hands before he dropped it onto the table, his breath caught in his throat. His brother had always been the one who stayed, the good son, the reliable one. Mark was the one who disappeared, who found excuses to stay gone, who only called on holidays and even then never stayed on the line for long. He looked up to see Linda standing there again, coffee pot in hand. "You okay, sugar?" He nodded reflexively, but it was a lie. She tilted her head. "You look like someone who just got some bad news." Mark hesitated. "Yeah. My dad. He's in the hospital. Back home." She didn't offer sympathy, didn't ask for details, just topped off his cup. "You heading there?" "I don't know." He hated the sound of that. It made him feel smaller than he already did. She studied him for a moment, then said, "Sometimes you gotta move before you're ready." And just like that, she was gone. He stared at the booth across from him, empty but filled with the weight of everything unsaid. He remembered sitting in a diner just like this with his dad when he was 15, after a brutal football loss. He had cried. His dad didn't say much, just handed him a napkin and said, "You get back up, that's what matters." Mark had hated that answer at the time. Now it echoed in his chest. The door chimed behind him. An older man walked in, gave a nod to Linda, and took a seat near the counter. Everything here moved in slow rhythms, small-town steadiness. It was the kind of world his dad had lived for. The kind Mark had sworn never to belong to, but here he was. He picked up his phone. The screen was still lit with Jason's message. His thumb hovered over the call button. Linda passed by again and, without looking, said, "Whatever you're running from, sugar, I promise it only gets heavier." He pressed call. The line rang once, twice. "Jason?" he said when the call connected. His voice cracked. "I'm coming." The interstate was quiet just after sunrise. Mark's Toyota hummed along I-75, windows cracked, the early heat seeping in. Pine trees lined both sides of the highway like a tunnel back to everything he'd tried to forget. He hadn't spoken much on the phone, just told Jason he was a few hours out. His brother had sounded exhausted but relieved. "Mom's already at the hospital," Jason had said. "They won't tell us much until after surgery." Mark had almost asked what kind of surgery. Almost. But the question had caught in his throat. Instead, he just said he'd be there soon. Now the hum of the road and the occasional roar of passing semis were the only sounds. He didn't turn on the radio. Silence felt safer. He kept thinking about Linda's words. It only gets heavier. The last time he'd seen his dad was nearly 2 years ago. Thanksgiving. A short, stiff visit where they'd exchanged maybe 20 words. His father had asked him if he was still chasing that podcast thing, and Mark had nodded. It was a little more than that now, freelance consulting, audio editing gigs, but explaining felt pointless. His dad didn't believe in things you couldn't hold in your hands, and Mark had spent most of his life trying to prove he didn't need his father's belief anyway. Now, he wasn't so sure. He passed a billboard for Sheldrake's Feed and Hardware, serving Valdosta since 1967. The logo was old, hand-painted, the kind of sign people ignored unless they grew up seeing it. Mark hadn't even realized the billboard still existed. His chest tightened. He reached for the glove box without looking and pulled out an old pack of gum. Inside was a folded photo, creased and sun-faded. Him and Jason, maybe 10 and 8, standing on the back of their dad's pickup, holding fishing poles. Their father behind them, one hand on each of their shoulders. Mark didn't remember the picture being taken, but it was the only one he kept in the car, hidden. He turned it over, his mother's handwriting on the back, Lake Burton, summer '99. He tossed the photo onto the passenger seat and blinked hard. The exit for Valdosta General appeared sooner than he expected. He signaled and veered off, heart racing. The sun was fully up now, casting sharp shadows across the road. The streets looked the same, red brick buildings, fading murals, cracked sidewalks. His hometown, frozen in time. At the hospital, he pulled into visitor parking and sat in the car for a moment, engine off. His hands gripped the steering wheel like a life raft. What was he even supposed to say? He stepped out, slammed the door shut, and crossed the lot slowly. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and coffee. At the front desk, a nurse asked who he was here to see. "Edward Sheldrake," Mark said. "I'm his son." Jason was slouched in a vinyl chair, elbows on knees, staring at a vending machine down the hallway like it might answer a question he hadn't figured out how to ask. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. When Mark turned the corner and their eyes met, it took a moment for recognition to settle. "Mark," Jason said, standing slowly, "you actually came." Mark stopped a few feet away, unsure if his brother meant it as a jab or genuine relief, maybe both. "Yeah," Mark replied, "I'm here." Jason nodded. For a second, neither of them spoke. "He's still in surgery," Jason said, glancing at the double doors nearby. "They said it's his heart. Blockage. They're trying to put in stents. Could be more. They're not sure yet." Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "When did it happen?" "Yesterday morning. He collapsed behind the counter." Miss Beth from the diner found him when she came in to get birdseed. Jason gave a half laugh, bitter and hollow. Figures he'd go down working. Mark leaned against the wall. How's Mom? She's in the chapel, praying. Jason paused. She's been asking about you. Mark looked down. I should have called sooner. Yeah, Jason said. You should have. There was weight in that sentence, years of it. But Jason didn't press. He sat back down, rubbing his hands together. Mark sat across from him. I didn't know if I should come. You didn't know if you could come, Jason corrected. You always think showing up means you're giving in, like coming home is some kind of failure. Mark didn't answer, it was too true. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead filling the space. Then the doors opened. A doctor in blue scrubs stepped into the hallway. Family of Edward Sheldrake? Both brothers stood. He made it through surgery. We were able to insert 2 stents. He's stable now, but he's still unconscious. We'll move him to recovery soon, then into a room. One of you can see him shortly. Jason exhaled, shoulders dropping. Mark felt his knees weaken slightly, but he held firm. Thank you, Jason said. The doctor nodded and walked off. You go, Jason said, turning to Mark. He might want to see you first. Mark blinked. You sure? Jason gave a tight smile. I've been here. He knows I'm not going anywhere. Mark hesitated, then followed the nurse who waved him in. The hospital room was dim, machines beeping steadily. His father lay in the bed, pale, tubes in his arms, oxygen beneath his nose. He looked smaller than Mark remembered, older, fragile. Mark stepped closer, then stopped at the foot of the bed. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. So he stood there, quiet, letting the reality wash over him. And for the first time in years, he let himself feel it. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, each beat marking time that suddenly felt both urgent and suspended. Mark pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down, resting his forearms on his knees, fingers laced. He watched his father's chest rise and fall beneath the hospital gown, slow, mechanical, like the rhythm wasn't his own anymore. I thought about what I'd say if I saw you like this, Mark whispered. But now that I'm here, his voice cracked. He hadn't meant to speak out loud. He glanced around the room. A plastic water pitcher, a tray with untouched pudding. A visitor's guide to heart health sat unopened on the side table. It felt wrong to speak into silence, but worse to let it linger. You'd probably call this weakness, he said softly. Talking to someone who can't talk back. He sighed. I spent so many years thinking you didn't see me, or maybe that you saw me and didn't like what you saw. I never wanted to be you, but I couldn't figure out how to stop measuring everything I did against you either. His father didn't move. I remember that time you caught me skipping practice, Mark continued. You didn't yell, you just said, if you want to quit, quit, but don't pretend like you're still trying. That pissed me off, but you were right, I was faking it. He sat back in the chair, rubbing his eyes. I've done that a lot, actually. Pretending I'm chasing something when really I'm just avoiding the stuff that scares the hell out of me. The door creaked open. Mark turned. It was his mom. She looked worn, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. Mark, she said quietly, you made it. He stood, a little awkwardly. She walked over and hugged him, and for a moment he let himself sink into it. He hadn't realized how much he missed that kind of closeness. He's okay, she asked, looking at her husband. Mark nodded, for now. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from Edward's forehead. I've been so mad at him, she said after a while. Always working, never stopping. But I never once doubted that he loved us. Mark watched her, something fragile breaking open inside him. I think, he said slowly, I've spent my whole life trying to force myself to take action, do something different, be someone else, without really understanding why. She looked at him, eyes full of softness and sadness. Maybe now's the time to stop running and start listening, she said. Mark nodded. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. A warm golden light spilled across the tile floor, touching the edge of the bed. and for the first time in a long while, Mark didn't feel the urge to leave. The chime above the front door rang with the same familiar jingle it had for over 30 years. The scent of soil, motor oil, and cedar hit Mark like a wave the moment he stepped into Sheldrake's Feed and Hardware. Dust floated through the shafts of sunlight slipping in through the front windows. Nothing had changed, not the creaky wooden floorboards, not the cluttered shelves, not the pegboard behind the counter, still filled with tools arranged in a pattern only his father understood. Jason emerged from the back room, wiping his hands with an old towel. "Didn't think I'd see you in here again," he said, not unkindly. "I wasn't sure either," Mark replied. Jason nodded toward the counter. "I came by to restock. Thought I'd open up for a couple hours. People keep calling, asking if we're closing." Mark scanned the room. "It looks exactly the same." "Yeah." "He always said if it ain't broke." Mark walked toward the counter slowly, dragging his hand across a stack of dusty seed catalogs. "It's weird. I used to hate this place." Jason smirked. "Yeah, you were dramatic." "I wanted more than this," Mark said, half laughing. "Or maybe I just didn't understand why this was enough for him." Jason leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You think it was enough?" Mark looked at him. "I mean, yeah, Dad loved the store," Jason continued, "but it wasn't just about wrenches and fertilizer. It was the people, the routine, the way folks around here counted on him. That's what made it enough." Mark nodded, eyes drifting to the back wall where an old photo hung. His dad, young, smiling, standing in front of the original storefront with Mark and Jason beside him, all in matching red aprons. "I talked to a customer yesterday," Jason said. "Said Dad once drove out to their farm on Christmas Eve to help fix a busted gate. Didn't even charge him. Just showed up with his truck and tools." Mark rubbed his chin. "He never told me stuff like that. He didn't need to." They were quiet for a moment. Then Jason asked, "You thinking about staying a little longer?" Mark didn't answer right away. "I don't know yet," he said finally, "but I want to figure out what I'm actually running from. And maybe that starts here." Jason gave him a look, not surprised, but maybe hopeful. "Well," he said, tossing him a set of keys, "if you get bored, the storeroom's still a disaster. Some things never change." Mark caught the keys, and for a brief second, something settled in his chest. Not peace, not yet, but the first flicker of something like purpose. He looked around again, at the place he thought he'd escaped, and realized maybe he wasn't stuck, maybe he just hadn't been ready to see it for what it was. A week later, Mark stood in the backyard of his childhood home, watching the early morning light filter through the pine trees. The grass was damp beneath his bare feet. Birds chirped high above, and somewhere down the street, a neighbor's lawnmower growled to life. Inside, the house was stirring. His mother was already up, humming softly as she brewed coffee. His dad was home now, resting in the recliner, thinner, quieter, but alive. Recovery would be slow. The store would stay closed for a while longer, but no one was in a hurry. Mark took a sip from his mug, black coffee now a part of his morning ritual. He still didn't love the taste, but there was something grounding about it. Something that said, "You're here. You're trying." He'd been helping out around the house, running small errands, fielding calls from longtime customers who asked about his father's health and offered to bring pies, casseroles, tools, stories. And at night, after his parents had gone to bed, Mark would sit at the old dining table, laptop open, recording voice memos, organizing thoughts, maybe for a new podcast series, maybe for himself. He didn't know yet, but he was listening, for once, really listening. That morning, Jason stopped by with a box of receipts and old ledgers. Mark met him on the porch. "Dad's record keeping is prehistoric," Jason said. "If you're bored, you could digitize some of this mess." Mark grinned. "Wow, finally living the dream." They sat on the porch steps, the box between them. "You serious about sticking around?" Jason asked. Mark paused. "I think I might be." Jason nodded slowly. "You know, you don't have to become him. No one's asking you to take over the store." "I know," Mark said, "but maybe there's something here worth building, something that's mine, even if it starts in the same place." Jason clapped him on the shoulder. "You're still a mess." Mark smiled. "But at least I'm here." The screen door creaked open behind them. Their mom poked her head out. "Boys," she said, "coffee's hot, and your father's awake. Says he's ready to give orders again." They laughed. The sound felt easy, unforced. Inside, the day would begin. Tasks would get done. Conversations would unfold. Things would still be messy, complicated, unfinished. But Mark was learning that showing up, really showing up, was the beginning of everything. He stood, grabbed the box, and followed his brother inside. For the first time in years, he wasn't forcing himself to take action. He just was.